In this lecture, we are going to cover IAS 16, which is Property, Plant and Equipment. As the name shows, this standard relates with the accounting treatment of property, plant and equipment. In this particular standard, we are going to cover all aspects which are related to the accounting for property, plant and equipment. Generally speaking, when we talk about a standard through International Accounting Standards Board, it is divided into 6 different parts. So the first part of the standard tells you about its objective. Then you get to know about its scope, what falls under the standard, which items are not covered under the particular standard. Number 3, you have definitions of key terms which are being used in the standard. Then number 4, you have the recognition criteria. Recognition criteria basically tells that what double entry of item needs to be passed and when that double entry should be passed. 5th part relates to measurement. Measurement basically means by what value a double entry is going to be passed. A lot of students mix these two things, recognition and measurement criteria. Please remember that these are 2 separate items. Recognition talks about what double entry is to be passed and when it is to be passed. And measurement tells you the value with which the entry is going to be passed. And the 6th one relates to disclosures. So broadly speaking, all standards are distributed into these 6 areas. In our course of studies also, we are going to use the same approach. Applying the same approach in IAS 16, in this particular lecture, we are going to talk about the objective of this standard, the scope, which means the items that are going to be covered in this standard, and the main definition of what do we actually mean by property, plant and equipment. Objective of every standard tells you about the accounting treatment, all aspects, how to recognize, when to recognize, how to measure initially, how to measure subsequently, everything about property, plant and equipment. So in this particular standard, we are going to learn all about the accounting of property, plant and equipment. The objective of every standard tells you in one line what item is going to be covered, related to which the accounting treatment is going to be prescribed. Then coming to the scope of this standard, in our broad spectrum of standards, we have 2 different ways in which scope is presented. One category is where the scope tells you which particular items are going to be covered under this standard. For some very broad general standards like IAS 16, it specifies that which items are not going to be included in this particular standard. So for IAS 16, we'll see that all kinds of property, plant and equipment is covered under IAS 16 except some major standards which are not covered under IAS 16. Number 1, non-current assets held for sale at discontinued operations. We will cover them under IFRS 5. Then we have biological assets. They are going to be covered under IAS 41. Mineral resources, they are covered under IFRS 6. They are not included in our syllabus, but the scope of IAS 16 tells that any kind of mineral resources do not fall under the scope of property, plant and equipment. So if you have, for example, a mine from which some minerals can be extracted, although it may be land and it may fall under the criteria of property, it is not going to be covered under IAS 16. Then, please do remember this next line, that any kind of property, plant and equipment. We've talked about 3 major standards over here, IFRS 5, IAS 41 and IFRS 6. So any kinds of property, plant and equipment which are used to develop or maintain these biological assets. So for example, you have an equipment for extraction of minerals, or you have a certain kind of equipment to manage your biological assets or agricultural related produce. So any such items are going to be accounted for under IAS 16. But the assets themselves are going to fall under the relevant standard for which the name is written. Coming to the definition of what property, plant and equipment actually means. The first and the most important thing over here is that this standard is only applicable on tangible assets. What do we mean by tangible assets? These are the assets which can be touched, which have a physical existence. So This standard is applicable only on tangible assets which are held for production, supply of goods or services. So basically the intention behind buying these products or making these items or assets is that they are going to be used in the business. This is a very main criteria. These are the assets which are going to be used in the business. Used in the business in what sense? Maybe they are being used for production of other items. They are being used in the supply of goods. So a machinery might be there for production. A motor vehicle might be there for supply of goods. A machinery might be there, or a hospital might exist for the delivery of services. It may be there for rental or administrative purposes. I will explain the administrative purposes first. So for example, if a building exists in a company in which the HR is there, the back-end office is there, the corporate office is there, all the assets which are held for administrative purposes, so any kind of corporate office, the machinery, the property, plant and equipment, everything is going to be covered under IAS 16. One more thing over here is rental purpose. This is something that I would like to highlight separately. When you talk about property, plant and equipment held for rental purpose, please keep this in mind that this criteria is only applicable on plant and equipment. The reason for it is that when a company has property which is held for rental purpose, property means any kind of land or building which is held for rental purpose, this falls under the scope of IAS 40. So when there exists a particular standard on an item, it is excluded from the generic standard. So property which is held for rental purpose does not come under the scope of IAS 16, whereas plant and equipment which is held for rental purposes, that is going to be accounted for under IAS 16. For example, if there is a rent-a-car company and it has cars available which it gives out on rent to other parties, or there is a particular machinery which is rented out to other parties like generator, etc., any kind of building construction machinery which is rented out to other parties. So any plant or equipment that is rented out to other parties, that is going to be included under IAS 16. So this is the main area which all reflects that whatever property is held for use in the business, that is going to be coming under the scope of IAS 16. Secondly, it is expected to be used for more than 1 year. When we say tangible assets, another word that we use for assets which fall under IAS 16, we say these are tangible non-current assets. What are non-current assets? Which are expected to be used in a business for more than one accounting period. So, combining overall definition, any kind of tangible assets which are non-current in nature and which are held for either production or supply of goods or services, rental to others, or for administrative purposes, they are going to fall under the scope of IAS 16. The only exception we saw was property, which is accounted for under IAS 40. Now let's see how we are going to do the accounting treatment of this property, plant and equipment. This we are going to cover in our remaining lectures. Thank you.